welcome to the series of channel chat series that we are in partnership with IDC, putting these together every couple of months or so. So welcome everyone. Hope everyone can see the slides here. If you have any questions you want to submit, feel free to do that through the chat option, and we'll keep an eye on those. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get this started, and I'll introduce Frank Vitagliano, CEO of the GTDC, to get us started.
Thank you, Kavita, and welcome everybody, and thanks for joining. So we're excited to, as Kavita said, continue with this series. Today, what we'll do is we will review first quarter results, which I'm sure everybody's anxious to see what's happening in the marketplace. And then the second thing we'll do, and Lauren will drive those as he always does. And then the second thing we're going to do today, which I'm really excited about, is Tom Mainelli has joined us, and Tom will talk about AI PCs. And as many of you know, I certainly know, and people I talk to, there's been a lot of discussion about that and how AI will, drive a resurgence in that space, particularly in the endpoint device area. So Tom's going to talk to us a little bit about that. Before we get started with that, let me cover two other quick things. One is we have our GTDC Summit in EMEA scheduled for June 4th and 5th. We've already had the North America one in February, and we had great attendance there. We're looking at a similar set of exciting attendees and speakers at the event in Europe. So for those of you that have interest, you can register at www.gtdc.org, June 4th and 5th in Amsterdam. And then the last thing I want to mention is we continue to provide our research efforts. We recently released Beyond the Cloud Marketplaces, which is a guide to the digital platforms that the distributors all have in place. We thought you'd find that interesting and informative. And then we will, in May, a couple of weeks actually, release a vendor's guide to market data and how we talk about leveraging the data that's available in the marketplace. And one of the things that we'll talk about specifically, not coincidentally, is the relationship that GTDC has with IDC in developing the North America tracker, which we'll now spend more time on. So with that, Lauren, let me turn it over to you, and welcome, and thanks again for putting this on for us.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a pleasure, and I'm happy to be here with all of our guests today as well. I think we've got a good story, a lot of data, and good updates. So let me jump right into it. Let's start with the macro environment and some positive news. So this is, we have a rolling Future of Enterprise Resiliency spending survey, and this is from latest results from February of this year, but it's done monthly. It's a really good way to get a pulse on spending expectations. And I've highlighted a couple of things here with the arrows. So this is about risk of recession in the coming year, and you can see this really dramatic drop in the US. So there's a lot of, chatter around that on economic news fronts, but that clearly is it's a down arrow here, less risk of recession, but it means it's an optimistic signal. And then if you recall, Asia last month or last time we got together, we had this really significant rise in their concerns about a recession, and that's receded a little bit. In comparison, Western Europe is kind of up and down, but overall they actually have the now highest expectation of recession since the US has come down a little bit. Their top priorities for risk factors for their budgets are also changing. So AI, we're talking about AI PCs. There's a lot of elements to AI, and that's the top priority. I think supply chain is interesting. Inflation is also interesting. What I actually want to highlight most is the transition that in the December results, which we saw last time, all three of these priorities were essentially economic related. And so now we're shifting away from the economic concerns and back towards technology concerns. One more slide on broader economics. So do you expect your IT budgets to be the same as this middle line, or do you expect them to be higher as the bottom line? So we have, quite a lot of optimism for IT spending, particularly in North America, but really across the globe, and very little, relatively, teens responses for risk of less IT spending. So in broad strokes, there's economic improvement, lower inflation, U.S. resiliency. Some of the, China has remained stable despite uncertainty in some of their numbers and policy changes. The soft landing scenario is our baseline. So that, we established that last year, but that continues to be the case. And there are, of course, risks, particularly geopolitics. And on the economic front, we're not out of the woods. Nobody's guaranteeing the soft landing, but we're moving in the right direction. And then with IT spending, we have improvements in PC and phone and server stabilizing. We have had resilient enterprise spending, although you'll see that it's becoming more price sensitive, and in the GTDC results that will be reflected. And AI is prominent here. It's also a prominent driver going forward. So there's a lot of the drivers, exploration of deploying AI, etc., continue to drive new spending, and that backs up the high expectation of continued IT spending that we talked about. One note, I guess, for this distribution-focused crowd is the outlook for indirect channels is a little slower than direct channels, and that, I think, reflects primarily the focus right now on higher value-added products like AI, which require more services and more back-end infrastructure, and so it's a little less device and consumer oriented, which plays better for the indirect channels. So that's I don't know if it's a headwind, it's just a market positioning note. Okay, so let's look at the North America distribution results. This is by year and by technology, and the stuff on the left is background. What we really want to focus on is this chart area on the right-hand side. You can see in sort of gold that PCs has stabilized. So they were down 30% year on year last year, and now they're down low single digits. So that's an enormous improvement. Infrastructure hardware went the other way. It went from about 8% down to almost roughly minus 18%. That looks worse than it I would say arguably is. It's driven a lot by Ethernet switches, which had a substantial rise. Also, just keep in mind, this is year to date. So this is through week 14 of each of these years. It's not the full years. So the Ethernet switches in particular, middle and late 23, hit a big peak as their supply issues were resolved. And so this negative growth that we're seeing in infrastructure in the orange bar on the right is heavily influenced by that. So other categories, software and services, have been the most resilient. They remained positive. We also saw AV and consumer electronics remained low, and other also remained below zero. So a little bit more negative, definitely some improvement on PCs, and I think our outlook going forward is going to be better, but hopefully the context and details really help. So now we're looking at weekly trends, and we've got a lot of volatility. You can see that from 2022 forward, we've got a lot less volatility than we had in 2021. These red lines, we had pretty substantial bottoms at the beginning of each quarter. the first week or two of the quarter. We have not yet seen that in Q2, so week 14 was still quite strong. But we did have in this circle, we had several weeks of pretty significant year-on-year decline. So almost at 20% decline for each of those. Week 1 was below 900 million in revenue, which there's only been 3 weeks like that since 2018. So that was definitely a soft week. It did follow positive growth in the end of 23. So, again, there's adjacencies, right? I think you're much more likely to have a soft week after you have a strong week and vice versa. But you'll see this trend in a couple of places, and it pulled down the Q1 results, and we've been strengthening now at the end of Q1 and going into Q2. So with that in mind, for example, 9 weeks out of this quarter were down only 1%, even though we had these couple of big declines. I mentioned already that we have not seen a particularly low yet in Q2, and we've had some stronger growth in week 13 with +7 and week 14 with -2. The rolling 4-week trend helps us kind of smooth out these trends, and kind of particularly in the blue, well, both blue and orange, you can see the trends a little bit better. We similarly had those 3 weeks add up to a low of about 4.5 billion, which is -15% year-on-year on top of prior declines. And that again was a relative low. That was one of 7 times since 2020. There were 25 times in 2018 and 19. So that's a little bit more like pre-pandemic normal, but it's still low for the last couple of years. Okay, then a 2-year average, we've used that, and I think is a very useful way to see kind of the cumulative effort of how we're moving through rebounds and recoveries from different years. So the 2-year trends are coming down on a weekly basis. They essentially, we've had strong years for various technologies that pandemic surge in 22 and 23, and we haven't had enough growth yet to kind of compensate for that. Similarly, on the 4-week trend, you've also got trending downward, but we've got, for example, in late February, we were at -4% relative to much lower than that earlier in the year. There's just some of the weekly volatility as we go through the year. Okay, Canada is, we've got 2 major markets. Canada's, of course, much smaller than the US. We had highlighted 2 main themes in the past. One is that Canada's cycle from the pandemic was faster than the US, and so that kind of changed their spending cycle. And the other is the correlation with the exchange rate on a 2-quarter lag, which is shown here in green. But other than that, Canada's in blue here, and you can see where the trend is kind of aligning with the orange and red, which is US and total spending. The Canada overall trend did dip in 23, but it's already coming back up and it's positive. And interestingly, now on the 2-year trend, Canada here in blue on the right is turning up ahead of where the US is. And so I think that, that you look at the exchange rate line in green and the very tight correlation there, that clearly has an impact. Okay, breaking things down by technology. So on the left, we have a rolling 4-week view, and the dashed lines are consumer devices. So audiovisual and consumer electronics has had the most volatility. It peaked almost 30% a couple of years ago, and now more recently, last year was down more than 35%. So that's a pretty big swing. But it's trending back up. It's just hit, positive growth again. So PCs, the other large consumer device category, is also positive. Other, which includes some headphones and other products, is turning up but still negative. Software and services, as I mentioned earlier on, have remained positive. So, they passed their lows and remain positive. That's very good. And then infrastructure hardware is the orange, which I mentioned is driven largely by networking. On the 2-year trend, we see more negative trends for consumer devices. So they're still trending down. You can see AV looks like it's hit a bottom, but PC and other are still going down. That, it just reflects the strength of the peaks in the last couple of years, and we haven't yet had enough. We need some more weeks to get some new positive growth on the books and remove some of the past positive growth for that trend to turn up. But expectations are that it will soon. Software and services also remained positive. Overall spending is trending down for now, but because of our changes in PCs and positive economics, we'll expect that to turn up soon. Okay, software is the largest category overall, and systems infrastructure in the blue dashed is the largest category. We did have a low in the middle of last year, but we've got a significant uptick now, which is driving the red dashed overall software spending back up towards 10% growth. We did have in orange, other software had a significant peak. No surprise that it's come down off of that. We'll have to wait, to see further in the year how low that dip will go. But I think no particular reason to be concerned about that. App spending has hit a decline, and app deployment and development had a particularly soft couple of weeks in Q1 following a peak. So this orange line should turn around. All right, let's see. Okay, overall growth on a 2-year trend has also passed the bottom. We still see apps and other software below 0, but apps at least is back up to near 0. Okay, on the services side, again, the dashed red line remained positive. It looks like we've passed the low there, so relatively stable spending. The largest category is others here in the blue dashed line, and that is continuing to grow by more than double digits. We have had a rebound in other support services. So in gray, you can see this the line coming up almost 15% about in the most recent week. But we've had some softness in extended service and phone consulting. So phone consulting in particular was down more recently. Cool. All right, shifting to the 2-year view here. Overall services, again, still positive and steady. Phone consulting is better, but still definitely down. It's a relatively smaller category. If you look on the left, you can see that dip. Warranties in blue are down from a major surge. So if you look at the bottom, the left-hand chart, the blue line on the bottom, Q4 of 23 was almost, it was up substantially from past years. And actually, if you don't see it so well here, but in 22, growth was more than 50% for that category. So again, we have a little bit of normalization on categories like warranty, but overall services are remaining quite stable. Okay, and that brings us to personal computing. So notebooks is by far the largest category. That's in this dashed line. We can clearly see, much higher spending in 21 and 22. And that really kind of fell apart at the end of 22 when we had this, we had a low. And then we've recovered a little bit mid-year 23. Now we're going through another low and a recovery. Overall sales in week 14 were +7. And if you look at the trending, either the red dashed or the blue dashed, you can see that we're pulling back into positive territory now. We were +11 for notebooks, even after some recent negative growth there. Desktops is the next category, and desktops also turned positive. Workstations turned down. So I think, I've highlighted this in past calls. You can see it here. This workstation in sort of gold or lighter yellow was up more than 60% from in the latter half of 21, and then stabilized or slowed down in 22, and then we had a little bit of a dip. So relative to other categories, the dip, was comparable, and following such a large growth trajectory, that's a really actually strong performance. So to be stabilizing at that level is quite good. Tablets and PC others remain negative, but we're expecting refreshed iPads sometime this year, and that should help drive some growth. We also have beginning of a replacement cycle for end of life for Windows 10. So that should drive some growth, as well as we have, the beginnings of pandemic era PCs. Some of those will be refreshed. So there's, I think, multiple drivers that are going to push PCs going forward. As I mentioned before, the 2-year trend is still looking negative because we just haven't had enough positive growth to offset growth from 2 years ago. So that's why you still have this overall declining trend. But we would expect more growth in the coming weeks and quarters. So that was faster than I expected, but hopefully still quite good. That'll give Tom a little more time. I do want to spend a minute here on the North American Distribution Tracker Coverage, which is this product we have through the partnership with GTDC. And, we've been talking about these results, but want to make sure that folks know that there's a ton of technologies and brands and dimensions that are being covered. Data is available weekly and or monthly, and represent a very large part of IT distribution, over 90%. And if you have any questions about what's available or how to access it, then please let us know. And with that, let me pass it to Tom to talk about AI and PCs.
Thank you, Lauren. And just to punctuate your comment on iPad, there was an announcement this morning. Apple has got an event on May 7th where I think they're going to roll those out. So, all right, if you want to go ahead and build this out, Lauren, that would be great. So I'm going to cover what I think is a pretty hot topic right now. I know I'm spending 85% of my time talking about it right now. It's the AI PC. And at IDC, one of the things that I think everybody on this call knows well, for us to count things, we need to characterize or categorize things. And so we established our sort of initial AI PC taxonomy. This will evolve over time, but we've identified 3 primary categories. There's a hardware-enabled AI PC, and each of these AI PCs is leveraging a neural processing unit. So, typically everybody knows what a CPU is, everybody knows what a GPU is. Now we have NPUs, and these have actually been around for a while. They started off in smartphones. We've seen them a little bit on the PC side. Mac with their M series has NPUs. The Qualcomm parts have had NPUs, but now we've got SoCs from Intel and AMD. And so the first round of products land in what we called hardware-enabled AI PC. And that's an NPU that's got sub 40 tops. The number of tops that a part can run basically describes its AI capabilities. And so these initial products have sub 40 tops, and we've got parts from Qualcomm, Apple, AMD, and now Intel shipping. In the market, you'll recognize the Intel part is the first Core Ultras. And we've identified what's coming next, which we've called the next gen AI PCs. And these are going to be PCs with 40 to 60 tops of NPU for performance. And to date, only one has officially been announced. It's from Qualcomm. They announced it at the end of last year. It's their Elite X parts that are going to begin shipping about mid-year. But both AMD and Intel have sort of pre-announced their products. So from Intel, it will be Lunar Lake. From AMD, it will be Strix Point, and we're expecting both of those to ship later this year. And the other thing that characterizes a next-gen AI PC is not only 40 to 60 tops, but we are anticipating some fairly sizable updates to the OS, specifically Windows, that is going to change the way people leverage their PC. And it's going to drive a new range of experiences. And I'll talk more about that in just a sec. And then finally, in an attempt to look even beyond what we know is coming this year, we've labeled anything that have greater than 60 tops as advanced AI PCs. No products, no silicon announced there yet, but we do expect that to happen over the course of the next couple of years. And I do just want to note, because there will be somebody that comments, this is all around NPU to date. Yes, existing desktops and notebooks with discrete GPUs can run AI workloads. And of course, workstations are great for doing training around AI. Neither desktops nor workstations have specific silicon with NPUs yet, but we will advance and iterate on our definition as those products get announced. Next slide, please. Go ahead and build this out. So everybody's heard of the AI PC. The question then is, okay, why is this good and how is it going to drive a potential rebound in the market? There are four key reasons that we see, the four Ps. One is performance. So as you begin to specifically have apps that are created or updated to leverage that NPU, you'll be able to do more of those AI workloads locally, which means not going out over the network. Pretty much every AI experience today is network bound. And so there'll be less dependency on the network, and you'll be able to leverage the compute that you have locally. From a cost perspective, we do expect AI PCs, this first round and subsequent rounds, to cost a bit more than a non-NPU PC, but that upfront cost should drive a good return on investment because the cost of doing all of this AI compute in the cloud is quite high. The PC, the personal computer, has always been personalized, but the thing that really excites me about the AI PC is that with that NPU and with updates to the OS, the PC is actually going to get smarter the longer and the more you use it. And so it's going to start to figure out ways to personalize and make you more efficient the longer you use it. And then finally, another key reason for excitement around the AI PC is privacy and security. So as more of these apps and as the OS itself gets AI-ified, less of your data needs to leave the PC and go to the cloud. And so if you're a small company or a consumer, or even a medium or large company that wants to be very careful with the data that you generate in your own your own IP, you'll be able to keep more of it on the PC and less of it on those round trips to the cloud. Next slide, please. So the thing that I would love everybody to take away from this presentation is that there's really two tracks around the AI PC, and the one you're going to hear the most about right now is around apps and specific apps getting new AI capabilities. Intel likes to talk about their AI acceleration program with 100 ISVs driving towards 300 new features that have AI capabilities. AMD and Qualcomm have similar programs. And of course, we expect Apple to start talking more specifically about AI on the Mac at WWDC this year. But where things get really interesting is, go back one slide real quick, is around that OS capability. And so regardless of whether your app gets AI functionality, as the OS gets AI functionality, it's going to make the way you use the computer, we think, more frictionless. And so even if you're using an old app, it doesn't get updated, the OS is going to make it easier for you to interact with that app and have that app interact with other apps. Go ahead, Lauren. But the fact is, as much as the PC industry, and probably a lot of folks on this call, will drive a story around local with AI PC, the future will continue to be hybrid, as my AI-generated hybrid tiger miniature pincher reflects. Beyond the AI PC itself, OSs are going to have to get smarter. And what I think you'll see is over the course of the next 6, 12, 18 months, our OSs will be running large language models. And it will often be the OS that needs to decide, hey, should this be run locally on a quantized smaller LLM? Should it be run on a medium size that's maybe inside my company's network, but still on-prem? Or is this a job for a big LLM up in the cloud? And so we think all of those things are going to be relevant, and that the biggest jobs are probably going to still run in the cloud. But what you will see, I think, starting about mid-year, is more discussion around LLMs coming down onto the system. And then if you're a company like IDC, who's got 50 years of data, do we have our own LLM that we then train specifically on our data and that we push out to our analysts so they have access to that? Next slide. So one thing that I find particularly interesting about the AI PC is that as we started interviewing IT decision makers, they showed a real interest in early adoption. And that is not the norm. IT decision makers are not typically the first in the boat on a new technology. They'll let consumers try it out. They'll wait a year or more. But the thing that everybody I know on this call recognizes is you've got a lot of IT decision makers who are being pushed by their C-suite to figure out how to leverage AI. They're trying to figure out what element of that's going to be in the cloud, what's going to be on-prem, and what's going to be on the device. But more specifically, they're all thinking about this Windows 10 transition. They've got till October of 25 to get migrated over to Windows 11. And the fact is, the PCs that they purchase between now and that end of service are the PCs that their end users are going to be using for the next 3, 4, maybe 5 years. And so a lot of them really are thinking about buying up to an AI PC, even if they're not 100% sold on what use cases are going to be effective inside their company, but they want to buy a PC that is going to satisfy those use cases for the next 3 or 4 years. Next slide. So when we ask these IT decision makers across enterprise, small, medium business, and gov ed about their next wave of PC deployments, you can see here that AI capabilities were very important. Now, recognize that these survey questions were asked before Core Ultra had been launched into the market. And I would argue that today, IT decision makers are a lot smarter about what AI PC means. But what we have found in our ongoing conversations with IT decision makers and focus groups, and we probably got half a dozen surveys out there, is they continue to be very excited about this and ready to leap in. Next slide. All right, so I've talked a little bit about what the AI PC is inside of our taxonomy, how I think it's going to be relevant. This is our initial forecast. This is a worldwide forecast. This is comprised of both consumer and commercial. And just to be super transparent, this is a top-down forecast that was driven by myself and one of the analysts on my team, really looking at where we saw the silicon roadmaps, the appetite from commercial and consumer, and then OEM support. And what you can see here is in 22, we actually had more AI-enabled hardware, almost exclusively Macs. In 23, Mac went down, and so that number went down. But in 24 through 27, you can really start to see the ramp here. So we've got about 45 million units in the sub 40 top category, and then around 4 million units in the greater than 40 tops. And that grows, pretty dramatically over the course of the next handful of years. Green is the non-NPU, and right now we still see that as having a role in the market, but that could change. I think the one area where we don't have a lot of visibility yet, but we know it's coming, is where Google and Chromebooks will land with regards to NPUs. So if you move to the next slide, this is our segment forecast. So going back to my comment about IT decision makers, we really do see commercial driving this market. In fact, I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting consumer use cases, but they are less crystallized than the commercial use cases to date. And so this is going to be driven on the commercial side first, with consumer following. And then next slide. And so essential guidance. We do fundamentally think the AI PC could reboot this market. One comment that I left out around that forecast is when we did that top-down forecast, we did not increase the size of the market. We just overlaid our existing forecast. But what we do think will happen is it will drive higher ASPs. And that was a top-down forecast. We're going to do a bottoms-up forecast at the tracker level, at the country and regional level, with our next tracker rev. And so you'll be able to start to see which regions are going to uptake first. I think it'll be mature markets first. The benefits of the AI PC, lower cost over the life of the product, better performance, better on-device security, and a smarter PC. The killer app for the AI PC may be no app at all, but the OS as it gets smarter. Hybrid's going to be here for the foreseeable future. And so as you begin to talk with your customers about AI PC, I encourage you not to get over your skis on how much will be local versus what will be hybrid. ITDMs do show a rare appetite to be early here. And so part of, I think, the discussion with a lot of these ITDMs is going to be around, do I need sub 40 tops? Do I need more than 40 tops? What are the use cases that you're going to leverage? How can we help you land in the right place? We think the ramp is going to be pretty steep. Doesn't grow the TAM, at least initially, but it should have a positive impact on ASPs. Next slide. And this is just a quick slide on some of the work that we do broadly at IDC, in addition to the work that Lauren does. I'm constantly talking to both IT decision makers and consumer buyers, as well as the vendors in the market, and always happy to take questions when people need a real world reality check on what's happening out in the world.
Tom, it's Frank. What,
Yeah.
what is TOPS? I don't know what that acronym stands for.
It's trillions of operations per second.
Say it again?
Trillions of operations per second.
Oh.
So whereas the CPU, we sort of fixated on megahertz, right? How fast. This is a measure of how many basically AI calculations it can do. And so what's interesting about the NPU is, these first products are around 11 TOPS. A GPU is many multiples of that. But a GPU requires a lot more power. And so I had it characterized to me by an OEM who said, yes, you could do these things on a CPU or a GPU, but you need to be plugged in because you're going to run your battery down. But the NPU is going to do it much more efficiently. And then as we get to greater than 40 TOPS, it's going to allow the OS to sort of persistently and pervasively be listening and reacting to what it sees, crossing your screen, questions you ask. My long-term vision is that, when I sit down at the PC in the future, it's going to know that the first thing Tom does is look at his email and respond to any queries that came in overnight. And so, okay, Tom's sitting down at 7 a.m. PC or 7 a.m. in the morning. I'm going to serve him up what he needs to see. Oh, this email has a question about this document. Let's bring up the document and just start to take friction out of the process.
Okay, we have quite a few questions submitted in here. So Tom, they're
Oh,
most, so I'll go ahead and get started here. The first one is going to be, what sort of price differential between current PCs and an AI version in the near term?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't have the answer to it yet. So we have run surveys, and initially commercial buyers showed a willingness to pay 75 to 100. I know the OEMs expect to charge more than that. Because the Core Ultras just started shipping in the Q1, and we're still collecting our Q1 data at the tracker level, I don't have a good answer to that, but I would say probably 200 plus.
Okay, and I have a question here on the NADT actually. Which category would PC peripherals such as docking stations fit in the NADT? Yeah.
That'll be in the others category here. We do have them broken out in different categories, but I've focused just on the largest categories.
Okay, thanks for that. Next one is, will AI PCs be more or less hackable?
What a great question. So the first thing that a lot of IT decision makers want to talk about when you talk about the AI PC is that that you can leverage those AI capabilities to make the device more secure, right? What the biggest weakness on a PC is typically the user, right? The user gets tricked into doing something. But if the AI can be running and paying attention to what's coming in and saying that looks questionable, don't click on it. It could make it more secure. Now, I say that full well knowing that the bad guys are going to leverage AI to figure out how to attack PCs as well. So in the end, maybe it's a wash, but I know a lot of the security vendors are thinking about how can we put this agent on the PC to make it more secure.
Okay, the last question here from Oscar is, how relevant is the AI PC for AI ops and commercial? And is this something the ITDMs are taking into consideration?
I don't have a good answer. I mean, I do think it is relevant. I don't think IT decision makers know enough to be taking it into consideration yet, but I think they are getting smarter right now. All the OEMs are having conversations with them about what the AI PC is. The challenge really is that you've kind of got the sub 40 tops that are shipping now and the greater than 40 tops that are about to ship. And we see those two devices as being quite different in terms of their capability. And so the biggest challenge in the market is going to be, how do you sell sub 40 top parts today, continue to sell those parts as the greater than 40 top parts come out, and how do you sort of help your end users, your IT decision makers, choose the right PC for the right end user.
Do you have time for a couple more just popped in? Do you have time right
I
now,
do.
Tom? Do you want
I'm
me to-
good. Yeah.
Okay. And somebody just wanted clarification on that price differential. On the AI PC, is it a $200 incremental is what you're talking about?
Yeah, really the way to think about it is from a unit perspective, you'll just see a shift towards more premium. And the industry itself, I think, is really wrestling with, okay, we want this to be premium. It can be a beachhead against continued encroachment by Mac in commercial. But how long do we keep the premium there, and how long until we move down into more mainstream prices? And so the initial silicon is going to drive higher costs because the silicon costs more. But then, as the silicon providers iterate and move on to the next process, the prices will come down. And so I think you'll just see more premium prices for AI PCs.
Okay.
And then I see the question, AI PCs increase memory. What are your thoughts on PC and mobile phone storage? It's another great question. One high level response is that we do expect, if you intend to be running LLMs on your PC, 16 gigs of memory is really a baseline, and you're probably going to want more. From a storage perspective, actually, a lot of these AI tools could drive the need for more storage on the device. But I think the challenge is going to be OEMs are going to be, okay, we're paying more for the silicon. We need to add more memory. Where does that come from, right? Do we put a smaller SSD in there and ask people to store it in the cloud, which I think is kind of funny because you're making the argument, get an AI PC, run it more locally. Oh, now I don't have enough storage for all this great AI content I've generated locally. So I think there's going to be a lot of push and pull, but you definitely need more memory.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Tom. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll have a recap of this and information on our website, www.gtdc.org, here in the next couple of days. So keep your eye out on these webinar series. And if there's anybody else from your team you want included in the invitation process, let us know and we'll make sure that they're included.